Evelyn Mercer's Chevy Bel Air was still warm when she vanished from the mountain community of Millcreek, Utah, population 12,903. The early fall morning arrived with a thick layer of fog, blanketing the Weber Valley and the roads leading up to Ogden. At 9:18 a.m., Evelyn's neighbor, Lorna Hayes, waved through her kitchen window as the 32-year-old woman carried a small paper bag across the narrow yard between their two modest wood-frame houses. Evelyn was returning the porcelain mug that Hayes had lent her the night before, the one with the blue floral pattern that had been with her for more than 3 decades. The older woman watched Evelyn's figure fade into the pale white mist, her gray wool coat the last streak of color, before it was swallowed by the frigid emptiness. What happened in the next 37 minutes would haunt Millcreek for nearly half a century. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In September 1959, the Millcreek area of Utah still maintained the slow-paced and private rhythm of a mountain community, with narrow roads running along the base of the Wasatch Range and scattered wooden houses amid wide-open spaces. That morning, 28-year-old Evelyn Mercer left her small home as part of her usual routine. She planned to drive her Chevy Bel Air up to Ogden to handle some personal errands, including stopping by the shopping district where she always went when she needed to buy things or mail items. The trip from Millcreek to Ogden wasn't far, just requiring travel along highway sections that skirted the valley, and for Evelyn, it was a familiar route she'd taken for years. Witnesses at the Ogden shopping district remembered her appearance that morning quite clearly. Evelyn entered a store, bought a few items, then returned to the parking lot, holding a paper bag and seemingly looking for her keys and her purse. Everything unfolded in the characteristic quiet of a small town, with no signs of anything unusual or any situation that drew attention from those around her. After that point, no witnesses confirmed seeing Evelyn again as she left the shopping area. By afternoon, her family began to notice her prolonged absence. This wasn't Evelyn's habit. She always returned before dinner and usually called if there were changes to her schedule. As night fell without any news, her husband and relatives went to neighbors' homes to ask around, called acquaintances in Ogden, and tried to trace the places Evelyn might have visited. Searching the residential area yielded no results. No one had seen Evelyn return, nor had anyone encountered her on the road. As the hours of waiting passed in silence, and all signs indicated she had disappeared from her familiar route, the family was forced to confront the reality that something unusual had occurred. Unable to determine her last location, and with no more clues for their own search, they decided to report to the law enforcement agency in Weber County that Evelyn Mercer was missing. When the Mercer family contacted the Weber County Sheriff's Office, the information about Evelyn's unexplained disappearance was immediately received. And in a short time, authorities dispatched a task force to Millcreek to meet directly with the family and conduct initial checks according to the 1959 Missing Persons Investigation Protocol. The first thing they did was verify the family's report, the time Evelyn left home, the purpose of her trip, the route she typically used, and any details related to her travel habits in recent weeks. After recording personal identification and basic schedule information, the officers inspected Evelyn's residence to determine if there were signs of criminal activity. They observed the entire interior area, paying attention to details that often indicate struggle or break-in, such as pried doors, overturned furniture, or broken items, but the entire house remained in its usual orderly state. The kitchen, living room, and bedroom showed no unusual signs. The officers also checked the front and back door locks to confirm they were intact, while noting no traces of forced entry or unfamiliar footprints in the backyard area. After ruling out the possibility of a struggle at home, police began gathering more detailed information from the family, including the specific purpose of the trip to Ogden, the places Evelyn planned to visit that day, any personal relationships that might relate to her journey, and the condition of her Chevy Bel Air, as well as the items she usually carried when going out. The family stated that Evelyn only carried her everyday small handbag, with no need to bring large items or special belongings. They also confirmed that before leaving home, she had not mentioned any long trips or changes to her schedule that day. Based on this initial information, the task force proceeded to create a missing persons file according to 1959 standards, including Evelyn's identifying information, clothing description, vehicle details, the most recent photo, confirmed last points of contact, and witness statements from those who saw her at the Ogden shopping district. This data was entered into the official report and forwarded to relevant units in the county for coordinated verification. Since this was not yet considered a case with signs of crime at the time of reporting, police followed administrative procedures, receiving, recording, filing, and proceeding to analyze the route to determine areas for further checks. The officers present at the Mercer home that evening concluded that there were no immediate signs Evelyn had left under unusual circumstances, but her failure to return to Millcreek and contact her family throughout the day was an event that needed to be handled according to missing persons investigation protocol. After completing the report intake and residence inspection, the Weber County Sheriff's Office moved to the phase of analyzing Evelyn Mercer's travel route to determine the most reasonable search scope in the initial hours of the disappearance. The first thing they did was identify the route Evelyn typically took from Millcreek to Ogden, a not too distant journey, but with many empty stretches and side branches leading to small residential areas, farms, or secondary roads connecting to less traveled zones. According to the family, Evelyn frequently used the main road running along the valley, connecting Millcreek to Ogden, in a relatively straight path, involving only a few major intersections and some small gas stations along the traffic corridor. Based on this information, the investigation team reconstructed the theoretical route, leaving Millcreek connecting to the highway, continuing through lower road sections, then entering the Ogden Shopping District Center for shopping or personal errands. To verify, police divided the task force into small groups to visit each location along this route to collect real-time data from witnesses or nearby residents. At the first gas station on the route, staff said they didn't clearly remember seeing Evelyn's Chevy Bel Air on the day she disappeared, as this was an area with a moderate amount of traffic, but they didn't rule out the possibility she stopped for gas. The investigation team recorded this information in the file, according to 1950s characteristics, where witness statements were the primary data source due to the lack of recording equipment or surveillance systems. As the investigation team proceeded a few more miles along the main route, they stopped at a grocery store and a small pharmacy near the Ogden Shopping Center. Store staff confirmed seeing a woman matching Evelyn's description that morning. She entered the store, bought a few items, and left with a paper bag in hand. The description of appearance, clothing, and gait all matched the information provided by the family. Another witness said they saw Evelyn leave the store and head toward the parking lot behind the shopping district, where vehicles were parked mixed between shoppers and employees of the stores along the avenue. This was the clearest confirmation of Evelyn's presence on the day of her disappearance, and also one of the key data points for establishing a relative timeline. Although no one could pinpoint the exact time she left the area, through matching descriptions of morning activities and store opening hours, police could determine the time frame of her appearance at the shopping district as late morning. The investigation team continued surveying nearby stores to determine if anyone saw the direction Evelyn left. Some staff recalled that the parking lot wasn't crowded at that time, and most customers moved quickly, making it hard to identify Evelyn among those coming and going after she left the store. However, the fact that some people said she walked toward the parking lot reinforced the likelihood she returned to her Chevy Bel Air. Nevertheless, no witness could confirm she got into the car or started it and drove away. This was a critical gap, preventing the investigation team from knowing for sure if Evelyn left the shopping district in her personal vehicle or departed the area in another way. When cross-referencing all statements, police tried to rearrange the information in a logical order. Morning, Evelyn leaves home. Noon, she is seen at the Ogden shopping district. Last point, she appears at the parking lot with a paper bag. No witnesses saw Evelyn or her car leave the area. Based on this data, police designated Evelyn's official last known location as the parking lot area behind the Ogden shopping district. This became the central coordinate in the investigation file, as all subsequent clues had to stem from this pivotal point. When the investigation teams matched all statements and collected data, they concluded that Evelyn's actual journey matched the planned route up to the point she left the store. From the moment she stepped into the parking lot, all information was interrupted, with no witness confirmations, no descriptions of direction or interactions with others. Due to the limitations of investigation conditions in that era, police could only mark that area as the last recorded location of the victim's presence, while preparing an official summary of the morning's events as the foundation for subsequent search steps. Once Evelyn Mercer's last known location was established at the parking lot behind the Ogden shopping district, the investigation team shifted to compiling all witness statements gathered that day and in the following days to assess accuracy and the potential to reconstruct the victim's movements before the disappearance. In the 1959 context, without video surveillance or electronic data support, statements from those present in the area were the only source of information for police to rely on. Overall, witnesses all noted the presence of a woman matching Evelyn's description at the shopping district, but their descriptions of her behavior, direction of movement, and the appearance of other vehicles varied significantly. One group of witnesses said they saw Evelyn holding a paper bag as she left the store and walked straight toward the parking lot, seemingly looking for keys or about to open the car door. These people were positioned relatively close to the store exit, so their viewing angle was quite clear, increasing the reliability of their statements. However, another witness claimed the woman resembling Evelyn did not head straight to the parking lot but turned toward the side road leading to the area beside the shopping district, a less crowded zone connecting to a staff-only side path. When the investigation team asked for more details, the witness admitted seeing from a greater distance, with the scene quite busy with people coming and going, so they weren't entirely sure the person seen was Evelyn. This was a typical example of noise in statements, where limited observation conditions and overlapping clothing led witnesses to misattribute the subject. Another witness said they saw a small dark-colored pickup truck driving slowly around the area right after Evelyn left the store. This person did not confirm the truck was involved, but its appearance timing was close enough to when Evelyn exited the store to become a data point for analysis. However, a witness standing a few stores away stated they saw no pickup truck appear during this time, noting the road around the parking lot was quite empty, with no unusual vehicles moving. When comparing these two statements, police noted the contradiction in both vehicle type and observation time, preventing the team from immediately relying on this data and requiring consideration that the first person might have misseen or over-focused on another vehicle's movement in the area. Additionally, one witness claimed to have seen Evelyn walking in an area not matching the direction to the parking lot, saying she entered a small road between two stores. But this statement contradicted information from those near the store exit, who said Evelyn went straight to the parking lot. Upon closer analysis, police found this witness was positioned farther away with a non-direct viewing angle, making misidentification of a similarly built woman likely. To evaluate overall reliability, the investigation team categorized statements into two groups, those with close positions and clear views, and those with distant positions or partially obstructed views. The first group included employees at the store where Evelyn shopped, all describing her leaving via the main exit and heading to the parking lot behind the shopping district. This group was rated highly reliable. The second group included those standing far away, busy with work, or glancing briefly, with statements often containing many uncertainties. When analyzing differences between the two groups' statements, police found the reliable witnesses shared common points. Evelyn left the store, headed to the parking lot, held a paper bag, showed no unusual signs, and did not enter the side road. This made statements claiming she went to a remote area or walked in another direction less consistent with the overall data. The biggest discrepancy was the appearance or non-appearance of the small pickup truck. In the context of the Ogden shopping district in that era, delivery trucks appeared quite frequently in the morning, so a witness seeing one driving slowly could not immediately be considered suspicious. However, the truck's appearance timing per the witness was close enough to when Evelyn left the store that this detail was retained for official report analysis. After compiling all statements, the investigation team concluded that the most likely accurate data points were Evelyn was at the Ogden shopping district that morning, left the store with a paper bag, and headed toward the parking lot. Statements about her going in another direction or seeing unusual vehicles would be kept as supplementary data, but lacked sufficient basis to alter the confirmed last known location. Through cross-referencing statements and evaluating reliability, police completed an important foundational part for continuing to trace Evelyn's subsequent journey before she vanished. After completing the review of witness statements and determining the last known location of Evelyn Mercer at the parking lot behind the Ogden commercial area, the Weber County Sheriff's Office moved to the step of mobilizing a large-scale search operation, an activity frequently deployed in missing persons cases from earlier periods, but constrained by technology and resources. Police coordinated with local units, rescue teams, and volunteers to begin a search extending over a radius of many miles from the last sighting point. The search plan was divided into multiple layers, each handled by a dedicated team to ensure all areas the victim might have passed through were checked in the shortest possible time. The first area focused on was the trails and side roads connecting from the commercial area to the outskirts of Ogden, where the missing person might have accidentally turned or been led without drawing much attention. Foot patrol teams combined with mounted units scoured each section of road, checking small paths and steep slopes or densely wooded spots. Next, the search force expanded to nearby canyons such as Ogden Canyon and the smaller branches running parallel to the trails. This was terrain with complex geography, numerous rock crevices and narrow mountain slopes, making the search highly challenging. The task force used detailed topographic maps to divide zones and ensure each area was surveyed at least once in a short time frame. Concurrently, another group focused on checking areas near rivers, streams, and small lakes scattered along the route from Millcreek to Ogden. These bodies of water could be sites of accidents, but also places where objects might unintentionally drift. Water levels in the small streams were not too deep, but search teams still conducted careful sweeps to determine if any traces matched items the victim typically carried. The next group was dispatched to mountain routes and slopes near the commercial area where signs of a vehicle skidding or plunging down might be found. They looked for metal fragments, tire skid marks, or any indications that a vehicle had veered off the main road. While performing this task, some volunteers discovered a small object near the bank of a shallow stream east of the commercial area. This object was a piece of fabric with delicate patterns, roughly the size of a small scarf, but determining whether it was related to Evelyn was impossible at that time. Officers collected the item following standard procedure, but made no conclusions due to lack of verification basis. Beyond this fabric piece, the search force noted a few other signs such as unclear footprints on a soft dirt path or light skid marks near a slope, but since there were no lasting traces, they provided no specific evidence that the victim had been there. After 3 days of continuous mobilization, the aggregated results from the search showed no clear signs directly related to Evelyn's presence or her Chevy Bel Air. The failure to locate the vehicle was a major obstacle because if the car had been in an accident or abandoned, it would be the most critical marker for determining the victim's final direction of travel. Instead, all search efforts led to no authenticated clues. The summary report from the first 72 hours noted that recovered objects were in a state lacking sufficient information for conclusions, complex terrain made full coverage of the search area difficult, and no additional witnesses provided new information related to the victim's location. The investigation team, while acknowledging significant support from the community and participating forces, was forced to issue a temporary conclusion that the search did not yield data strong enough to proceed to determining the location or next direction of travel for Evelyn. After the large-scale search efforts in the first 72 hours yielded no specific results, the investigation direction of the Weber County Sheriff's Office shifted to the aspect of social relationships and personal connections of Evelyn Mercer, a common step in missing persons cases when no physical traces are available to follow. The investigation team began compiling a list of individuals who had significant interactions with Evelyn in the period before her disappearance, including family, friends, former colleagues, neighbors, and individuals who appeared at events she attended. During the information review, the agency paid special attention to the relationship between Evelyn and her ex-husband, Robert Blackstone, who had appeared in civil records due to conflicts during their previous marriage. Although the two had been divorced for many years, his presence in her past was still considered an important factor to evaluate in the case of Evelyn disappearing under undetermined circumstances. The investigation team placed Blackstone on the suspect list not because of direct evidence showing involvement in the disappearance, but because in similar cases from this era, individuals with prior conflicts with the victim were often examined first as a step in elimination. Recording him as a potential suspect was a procedural step and was carried out alongside reviewing others in Evelyn's close environment. When contacting Blackstone, police assessed his account of his time on the day Evelyn disappeared. He stated he was at his private home in Salt Lake City, a considerable distance from Ogden, and did not leave his living area throughout that morning and afternoon. Since there was no modern surveillance technology in 1959, police had to rely on his statement and those present around him at the time to check for contradictions or suspicious points. The individuals Blackstone claimed could confirm his presence all provided statements consistent with his account, but the reliability was not absolute, as these were memory-based references without physical data support. The investigation team also re-examined the level of conflict between Evelyn and Blackstone in prior years, largely based on civil records and a few accounts from acquaintances. However, these conflicts had occurred long ago, and there were no events near the disappearance time indicating new conflicts or notable tension between them. The assessment of his potential involvement was thus based on a synthesis of facts: geographical distance on the day Evelyn disappeared, his statement and related witness accounts, the prior relationship status, and whether he had strong motive to be involved in her disappearance. Although it was difficult to verify the absolute accuracy of the statement, police found no specific elements directly contradicting previously collected information. Moreover, Evelyn appearing in Ogden that morning and vanishing shortly after made the hypothesis of intervention by someone living outside the area even less grounded in the absence of unusual travel traces by Blackstone on the route between Salt Lake City and Ogden. With the data at that time, the investigation team was forced to assess that, although Blackstone was placed on the suspect list due to past conflicts, the likelihood of his direct involvement in Evelyn's disappearance was low based on verifiable information in the initial phase of the case. After partially ruling out the possibility of the victim being interfered with by acquaintances in the early stage, the Weber County Sheriff's Office investigation team shifted focus to the hypothesis that the victim might have had an accident while driving from Millcreek to Ogden or on the return trip. This was a mandatory evaluation step in any missing persons case involving personal transportation, especially in the 1959 Utah terrain context, which included many canyons, steep slopes, winding roads, and sparsely populated traffic areas where a solo accident could occur without immediate detection. The investigation team first analyzed the main route Evelyn typically used, identifying sections with high slopes or obscured by rock faces where a vehicle could easily lose control or slide off the road in poor visibility conditions. Topographic maps from that era showed the area between Millcreek and Ogden had many road segments running close to mountain slopes with deep drainage ditches on both sides and narrow curves requiring special driver attention. After identifying potential danger points, small teams were assigned to directly sweep these areas using both specialized vehicles and on foot for steep sections inaccessible to vehicles. They searched for physical signs that a vehicle might have left the main road, including tire skid marks, unusually disturbed soil, tire tracks veering off course, but throughout the inspection process, no traces matching the possibility of a Chevy Bel Air veering off were found. Additionally, the investigation team surveyed road segments leading into canyons where terrain was more complex and the chance of a vehicle falling into a secluded area was higher. They checked submerged rock beds, deep rain-created gullies, and junctions between the road and mountain slopes. In these places, police looked for metal fragments, broken glass, paint chips, or any evidence that could fall from a vehicle in a collision. However, no signs of this type were recorded, and the ground in many areas showed evenly compacted soil with no indications of disruption in the recent period before Evelyn's disappearance. Concurrent with mountain road checks, another search group was sent to roads crossing areas near rivers, streams, and small lakes along the journey between Millcreek and Ogden. They considered the possibility of the vehicle skidding down a bank or being swept into a flooded area. Water in the small streams was not deep, but some lakes near the road had sufficient depth for a vehicle to sink without easy detection. Nevertheless, during sweeps using small boats and walking along the water's edge, search teams found no metal objects or signs of disturbance on the water surface. These efforts helped reinforce the assessment that if an accident occurred, it was most likely at a very isolated point, but there was no evidence indicating it had happened. Furthermore, the investigation team analyzed the nature of Evelyn's trip. She left home in the morning under stable weather conditions, dry roads and clear visibility, significantly reducing the chance of an accident due to environmental factors. She was also familiar with this route and had no history of difficulties driving on winding sections. These details made the accident hypothesis less fitting without other physical traces to support it. After synthesizing all data from terrain sweeps, physical signs, and weather factors, the investigation team reached a preliminary conclusion that the likelihood of Evelyn having an accident on the Millcreek-Ogden road was low based on actually collected evidence. The absence of any skid marks, vehicle debris, or collision traces, combined with thorough checks of the most dangerous points, indicated this hypothesis lacked strength as the main investigation direction. However, due to unclear information about Evelyn's direction after leaving the commercial area, police could not completely rule out the possibility that she might have taken a different route than usual. Nevertheless, within the scope of verifiable data at this stage, the preliminary conclusion on the accident hypothesis was no actual signs found to prove or reinforce this possibility. While hypotheses related to accidents and personal relationships had not yielded clear directions, the investigation team began paying attention to a series of scattered information recorded in the early days after Evelyn Mercer's disappearance, involving 3 men seen in areas near the time and location potentially related to the case. This information was initially not considered central due to lack of supporting data, but as main investigation directions proved ineffective, police decided to re-examine all statements from Ogden residents and those present at the commercial area on the day Evelyn disappeared to assess the existence of external factors. From this cross-referencing process, 3 names appeared multiple times in accounts from unrelated witnesses. Manuel Rojas, a man who had appeared at a store near the commercial area; Thomas Gonson, described as being near the warehouse behind the parking lot; and David Delmont, owner of a dark-colored small truck, seen moving around the area on the morning Evelyn disappeared. The investigation team began recording each case for independent analysis. For Rojas, a witness statement indicated he had asked for directions to Millcreek in the days before Evelyn disappeared, though he was not a local resident and had no clear reason to be there. This prompted police to question his travel purpose during that time. Although asking for directions was not unusual behavior, its occurrence in the same time frame matching the victim's movement led to this data being added to the watch list. The second case, Thomas Gonson, was described by a witness as standing near the warehouse area behind the parking lot on the morning Evelyn left the store. An employee at a nearby store said Gonson often appeared around this area, sometimes doing small jobs or cleaning for hire, but on the day Evelyn disappeared, his presence had no clear purpose. Local records noted Gonson had a history of performing small dealings for various people, not serious criminal acts, but often involving message passing or informal brokering. This was a factor insufficient to conclude anything but enough for the investigation team to consider. The third case, David Delmont, was mentioned in a witness statement claiming he drove a dark truck slowly around the commercial area, right at the time Evelyn left the store. When comparing the vehicle description with local registration records, police noted Delmont owned a truck matching the witness description. Although driving around the commercial area was not unusual, the timing match and slow driving behavior led the investigation team to note the incident for further review. When cross-referencing witness descriptions and local records, the investigation team observed that all three men appeared at times or locations related to Evelyn's final journey. Although each individual data point did not lead to a direct conclusion, the repetition of the three names across multiple different sources resulted in them being added to an expanded suspect group, especially in the context where other investigation directions yielded no substantial clues. The investigation team analyzed the potential involvement of each individual by examining three factors: time of appearance, position relative to the victim's last sighting point, and compatibility between witness descriptions and personal records. Rojas was present in the area before the disappearance and had asked for directions to Millcreek, but there was no data proving he was in Ogden on the morning Evelyn disappeared. Gonson was seen near the parking lot area at the exact time the victim was there, but specific information about his behavior was lacking. Delmont was confirmed driving around the commercial area, but no direct witness saw him approach Evelyn. All these factors meant their involvement could neither be confirmed nor ruled out. Since there was no physical evidence or crime signs directly tied to the three men, police recorded them in the file as an expanded suspect group while monitoring for any additional information that might emerge in the subsequent investigation process. Including these three names in the list was a proactive step to ensure all possibilities were considered, though at that time there was no basis to conduct deep interrogations or legal actions against any of them. Although they had expanded the scope of the search and identified three additional individuals who appeared around the Ogden area at the time Evelyn Mercer went missing, the Weber County Sheriff's Office's efforts over many weeks still yielded no key data to break the case's deadlock. The complete absence of a body or any biological traces rendered all hypotheses regarding the victim's condition unverifiable. Concurrently, the failure to locate Evelyn's Chevy Bel Air posed a serious obstacle, as the vehicle is typically the most critical lead in missing persons cases involving long-distance travel. No vehicle meant no ability to determine the point of departure from the road, no way to assess a crash scene, and no means to confirm whether the vehicle was taken hidden or had taken a completely different route from the victim's usual path. The items collected during the search, such as a piece of fabric near the creek or small skid marks on the slope, lacked sufficient information to link them directly to Evelyn. There were no letters, personal identifiers, or distinctive details to classify these items as evidence. Further examination was also impossible due to 1959 technology's inability to analyze materials at a detailed level. Meanwhile, witness statements, though numerous, lacked consistency, preventing them from providing a continuous thread of information. No witness saw Evelyn leave the commercial area in a specific direction, nor did anyone see her interact with any suspicious individuals. Conflicting descriptions of her direction of travel or the appearance of unfamiliar vehicles further complicated reconstructing the timeline. When police attempted to cross-reference all statements, they could not create a logical itinerary extending beyond a few minutes after Evelyn left the store. The information gap immediately following this last known sighting became an unbridgeable break that no collected data could fill. Efforts to obtain new information from neighboring areas also yielded no leads. There were no reports of vehicle collisions, no calls about unusual road incidents, no sightings of an abandoned car in remote areas, and no indications that Evelyn had reached any location beyond the Ogden commercial area. Search teams ceased operations after covering all priority areas within a reasonable radius, and all internal reports reached the same conclusion: no direct leads, no signs of foul play, no evidence to guide the investigation. With the simultaneous absence of a body, vehicle, and physical evidence, coupled with witness statements that provided no viable trails, the investigation team was forced to acknowledge there was no basis to continue deploying resources for active investigation. By the end of 1959, Evelyn Mercer's missing persons file was officially transferred to passive storage, recorded under Weber County's unresolved cases, with a note that the case could be reopened if new evidence or witnesses with additional information emerged in the future. In the 2 decades following the transfer of Evelyn Mercer's missing persons file to passive storage, the Weber County Sheriff's Office occasionally received scattered reports from local residents or individuals who had passed through the Ogden Millcreek area around 1959, but none were reliable or detailed enough to form a new investigative direction. Some claim to have heard of a woman lost in the canyon area in the late 1950s, but no one had specific information about her identity or the circumstances of the encounter. When cross-checked for timing, most accounts relied on vague memories without verifiable markers. A few reports mentioned seeing an old car near an abandoned farm north of Ogden, but when police investigated, none of the vehicles matched Evelyn's Chevy Bel Air, and most had been there for years before her disappearance. Occasionally, someone claimed to have heard screams or strange noises on a rainy night in 1959. But when questioned further, they could not specify the location, exact time, or surrounding circumstances. There were also reports from hunters or campers who said they found clothing or items abandoned in the woods. However, upon inspection, none matched the description of Evelyn's belongings. In the 1970s, a more notable report emerged when a man said he had seen a car partially submerged in mud near a small lake east of the valley, but he could not recall the exact location as he was only passing through. When a patrol was sent to rescan the lake area based on his description, they found no matching vehicle. Seasonal changes in terrain due to rain and drought, along with natural mud accumulation, made the search difficult, but there was no evidence that the car the man mentioned was ever linked to Evelyn. Additionally, some information came from community rumors, such as claims of a car being pushed down a slope at night or hearing an engine in a canyon during off hours. However, no witness could directly confirm the truth of these stories, and most were recorded as unverified information. The investigative agency tracked these reports from 1960 to 1980, but when compiled and cross-referenced with the original file, none established a clear connection to Evelyn's movements on the day of her disappearance or provided specific guidance on the vehicle's location. All the fragmented information only indicated the existence of vague community memories, not data detailed enough to form new investigative hypotheses. Repeated re-examinations of potential scenes yielded no results, and there were no advances in evidence analysis to support or refute these reports. Ultimately, the investigative agency concluded that, despite the volume of incoming information, it all lacked accuracy and verifiable basis, resulting in no change to the initial assessment. In the 2 decades following the incident, no new data emerged that was compelling enough to reopen Evelyn Mercer's missing persons file. Entering the early 1980s, as many states across the U.S. began establishing units to handle backlog cases, Weber County also formed a small team tasked with reviewing unresolved missing persons cases from prior decades, including Evelyn Mercer's. The cold case team's goal was to reevaluate all documentation, review overlooked reports, and determine whether advances in criminal investigation techniques could provide new directions. The team began by gathering all original 1959 files, family statements, residence, scene reports, witness statements from the Ogden commercial area, projected route maps, the expanded suspect list, and initial search reports. All these documents were cross-compared with records from the subsequent 2 decades, including scattered reports received from 1960 to 1980. Upon reviewing notes from prior searches, the cold case team noted that no clear physical evidence had been collected that could be analyzed under modern standards. The fabric found near the creek was not preserved in a condition suitable for advanced analysis, and skid marks or footprints noted on the slope during the initial search had no accompanying data or images, rendering them valueless. This limited the potential for applying new forensic technology from the outset. In an effort to explore modern forensic techniques, the cold case team considered DNA comparison for old items, but the 1959 evidence was not stored to biological preservation standards, making analysis impossible. Additionally, no biological samples were recorded as belonging to Evelyn beyond her personal medical records, which provided no comparative data for the scattered evidence. The team also questioned the feasibility of reconstructing Evelyn's travel route using modern mapping methods, but concluded it offered no practical value due to the lack of physical markers linking the theoretical route to actual events. There was no information about Evelyn's car being seen on any remote road, no reports from passers-by of the Chevy Bel Air being abandoned or falling into a distant area. The 1950s accident and abandoned vehicle records were also incomplete, preventing the cold case team from tracing reports of vehicles found in wilderness areas in subsequent years. The team also re-evaluated the 1959 suspect list, including Robert Blackstone, Manuel Rojas, Thomas Gonson, and David Delmont, but reconnecting with these individuals or related parties was only possible to a limited extent. The cold case members analyzed that, even if foul play was suspected, the men's actions were not documented clearly enough to establish a legal basis for deeper investigation. No statements confirmed direct contact between them and Evelyn on the day of her disappearance. Nor was there a clear intersection between their activities and her departure route from the commercial area. Minor leads mentioned years later, such as screams or vehicles seen in vague locations, were deemed unreliable, unverifiable, and largely based on the subjective memories of informants. Overall, the cold case team found that the entire case lacked a physical evidence foundation from the start. No body, no vehicle, no physical leads, and no crime scene made Evelyn Mercer's disappearance one of the most inaccessible cases for modern investigative processes. Despite significant forensic advancements by the late 20th century, no material elements existed to apply these methods. Therefore, after numerous internal meetings and feasibility analyses, the cold case team concluded there was no reasonable basis to formally reopen the file. Evelyn's disappearance remained on Weber County's backlog list, with the status unable to proceed further due to lack of foundational evidence. In 2004, the natural setting at the Utah-Idaho border area witnessed a rare event. A prolonged series of dry months caused the water level of Bear Lake to drop to its lowest point in decades. The unusually deep drop in the lake's water exposed areas that had long been submerged, revealing the lakebed terrain that was not visible to the naked eye. During a routine survey conducted by the Water Resources Management Agency and a state environmental research team to assess the drought's impact on the lakeside ecosystem, a technician discovered a large metal object lying on its side in the sediment layer. Initially, they thought it might be an old piece of agricultural equipment that had been dumped into the lake years earlier, as the surrounding area had once seen intense farming activity. However, as the water level continued to recede in the following days, the curved metal roof and the frame structure behind it indicated that the object was more likely a long-submerged vintage car. The specialists immediately recorded the coordinates and reported it to the authorities responsible for lake area safety. Local police and a salvage team arrived at the scene to determine the object's true nature. Upon closer approach, they noted that the vehicle's frame was sized like a 1950s passenger car, with corroded metal panels but still retaining some characteristic design lines from that era. Though nearly entirely covered in mud and sediment, a portion of the vehicle's chassis sensor was intact enough for investigators to search for the identification frame number. Finding the frame number was a critical step, as it was the only feasible method to confirm the vehicle's identity when almost all external features were lost. After hours of careful cleaning and using specialized tools to remove the thick mineral deposits, the investigators uncovered a series of engraved letters and numbers on the remaining front frame section. This sequence was documented and cross-referenced with the state of Utah's inventory of vehicle records. The vehicle storage system from that era was not electronic, so investigators had to use paper records preserved in the Utah Department of Transportation archives. The cross-reference results showed a complete match with the frame number of a Chevy Bel Air, owned by Evelyn Mercer, the car she was using when she disappeared in 1959. This was the first time since the incident that police had found any physical evidence directly related to the victim and her final journey. Confirming the car at the bottom of the lake as Evelyn's vehicle created a major turning point in the entire investigation process. This prompted authorities to immediately establish a temporary crime scene boundary around the discovery area to prevent disturbance or impact on further analysis. The salvage team was deployed to expand the work area, using cables and lifting equipment to raise the car from the mud without altering its structure or damaging remaining surfaces in order to preserve as much potential evidence inside as possible. Throughout the salvage operation, forensic specialists closely supervised every action to ensure no potentially valuable details were lost. The car, though severely degraded, was preserved enough to identify its overall shape. When lifted out of the water, a strong smell of mud mixed with oxidized metal emanated clearly, indicating the car had been submerged without exposure to light or air for decades. The location where the car was found was also notable because it was not near the main road and not easily accessible from the shore. This raised questions about why the car was in that area, as the shortest route from Millcreek to Ogden did not pass through Bear Lake at all. However, this was not within the scope of on-site processing at the time of extraction and would be considered during analysis of the collected data. As the Chevy Bel Air was pulled onto land and prepared for transport to the analysis laboratory, authorities sealed the scene for photography, measurements, and recording of geographic information. The discovery coordinates, initial water depth, vehicle orientation, and surrounding marks were all documented in detail to create the most comprehensive picture possible of the vehicle's disposal or submersion location. This information would play a key role in evaluating whether the car sank due to an accident or was intentionally placed in the water. When the car was transported to the forensic analysis facility, Evelyn Mercer's missing person file was officially reactivated according to Weber County procedures. This meant all old documents were pulled from storage, reviewed in chronological order, and linked to the new discovery. Reactivating the file was not a formality, but a legal step confirming that authorities had new physical evidence of sufficient value to reopen the case. After 45 years without progress, the emergence of the submerged car at Bear Lake became the first foundational piece of data strong enough to break the nearly half-century deadlock, while setting the stage for deeper analysis to determine the cause and circumstances of Evelyn Mercer's disappearance. When Evelyn Mercer's Chevy Bel Air was brought to the Weber County Forensic Analysis Facility, the specialist team's first task was to assess the vehicle's overall physical condition to determine the extent of corrosion and biological growth on the surface, thereby estimating when the car sank into Bear Lake. The forensic experts noted that most of the paint had been completely eroded by the lake water, exposing metal that had deeply oxidized over time. Thick rust patches, especially in areas in direct contact with mud and mineral deposits, indicated the car had been underwater for decades. On the metal surfaces, growth patches including algae, small crustaceans, and layered biofilm formed in cycles were collected and analyzed. Based on the thickness and layered development, the forensic team estimated the car had been submerged in the lake for at least 4 to 5 decades, matching the time of Evelyn's disappearance in 1959. Deeply embedded growth on the frame and hardened algae patches only appear when an object is immersed for an extremely long period, reinforcing the alignment between the disappearance timeline and the submersion time. Upon completing the external assessment, the forensic team moved to exploring the vehicle's interior, the area with high potential for critical information, but also vulnerable to destruction from long-term water immersion. Access to the interior was conducted cautiously to avoid disturbing any remaining traces. The car's interior was nearly disintegrated, but a few components, still retained basic structure. On the floor, specialists found remnants of fabric with faded colors and rotted texture over time. Near the back seat, they recovered several long hair strands stuck to the headrest frame, encased in a thin mud layer that helped preserve some internal material. Nearby, partially burned cigarette butts were found in a small compartment in the front storage area, a spot with less exposure to water flow and sediment, thus retaining relatively good shape. Additionally, a small piece of paper almost completely disintegrated was discovered at the bottom corner of the driver's seat, but not intact enough to read or identify any writing. Each of these samples was collected under modern forensic protocols, placed in specialized containers, and transferred to the biological analysis lab. For the hair, specialists used nuclear and mitochondrial DNA extraction processes to confirm identity. Though the hair had been submerged for years, some strands still had roots sufficient for in-depth analysis. The extracted DNA was then compared to reference samples from Evelyn's relatives, collected during the file reactivation. Results showed high similarity, enough to confirm the hair belonged to the same genetic line as the Mercer family, with a very high likelihood it was Evelyn's. This was considered the first biological evidence in the entire disappearance case, providing a direct link between the victim and the recovered vehicle. For the fabric piece, analysis focused on fiber structure and characteristics that could link to the victim's clothing or personal items. Though the material was significantly degraded, examination showed the fabric and weave matched types of handkerchiefs common in the late 1950s. However, without patterns or writing, the fabric could not serve as an independent identifier and only supported the overall picture. The cigarette butts provided different value. Analysis of the tobacco type, rolling paper, and ash showed it was a brand popular in the late 1950s, but not one Evelyn or her family typically used according to old interview records. This raised questions about another person's presence in the car at or before submersion. Though DNA or saliva samples could not be obtained due to decomposition, the results still offered indirect clues about a possible outsider in the vehicle. Beyond the main samples, the forensic team analyzed the mud layer inside the cabin to check for biological or microbial components specific to the submersion site. Although the mud contained no traces linked to the victim, the sediment composition confirmed the car had remained in place in the lake since submersion, showing no signs of movement or dragging before being covered by mineral layers. This stability reinforced the likelihood that the car entered the lake around the time of Evelyn's disappearance, rather than being placed there later. Combining all data, the forensic team concluded that the recovered Chevy Bel Air was Evelyn Mercer's vehicle, submerged in Bear Lake around the time of her 1959 disappearance. Interior samples provided direct biological evidence tied to the victim, while traces not belonging to her suggested another person may have been in or interacted with the car before it sank. The forensic analysis of the Chevy Bel Air and samples from inside created a significant shift, forcing the investigation team to revisit the entire 1959 original file to cross-check every detail with the 2004 discoveries. The review process began by gathering all original reports, including the initial missing person report, residence check records, witness statements from the Ogden commercial area, information from large-scale searches, and the expanded suspect list recorded by the original investigation team. Each item was re-examined chronologically to identify points directly related to the submerged car or details undervalued in 1959 due to lack of modern analysis tools and foundational physical evidence. During file cross-referencing, the cold case team began noting small entries in old documents, especially a call by Robert Blackstone, Evelyn's ex-husband, to an acquaintance a few days before her disappearance. In 1959 records, this call was seen as casual inquiry about Evelyn's new address after moving to Millcreek. However, in the new context, this detail was re-evaluated because the car's location at Bear Lake showed the victim had deviated unusually from her normal route. Questions arose about why Blackstone needed the address then, and whether he was involved in tracking her route or personal information before she vanished. Though no direct data confirmed this link, the call detail was flagged for further checks in light of new information. Beyond Blackstone's call, the presence of 3 men on the expanded suspect list, Manuel Rojas, Thomas Gonson, and David Delmont, was re-examined under new legal and technical lenses. In 1959, they were noted only for being in the area or acting around the time but lacked physical evidence tying them to Evelyn or her vehicle. However, the submerged car and cigarette butts inside, not Evelyn's brand, prompted focus on the possibility of another person in the car near submersion time. Cross-checking old statements, the cold case team found Delmont's description best matched a dark-colored truck seen circling the Ogden commercial area the morning Evelyn vanished, making him a potential direct link to her journey. Rojas, seen asking for directions to Millcreek 1 or 2 days prior, was noted again for geographic proximity timing. Gonson, standing near the warehouse behind the parking lot, became a key link due to his position near Evelyn's last sighting. The lack of connections among the 3 men in old files had downplayed them, but the victim's vehicle discovery opened the possibility their actions were not random. Another point from old files was a note about a map found in Evelyn's purse the last time family saw her use it, with a small mark in northeastern Utah. In 1959, police had no reason to see this map as unusual, since no one knew Evelyn planned anywhere beyond Ogden. The note lacked evidence ties and was quickly deprioritized. However, with the car in Bear Lake, not on the Millcreek Ogden route, the marked map became data for re-examination. The team noted the old map mark did not exactly match Bear Lake, but was in the northeastern region, the direction Evelyn would head toward the lake area. This data was not confirmatory but suggested Evelyn may have taken a different route or been lured elsewhere. Combining all old factors, Blackstone's call, Rojas, Gonson, Delmont appearances around disappearance time, witness statements about strange vehicles, and the questionable map mark, with new submerged car data, the cold case team began forming a preliminary event model. This model did not aim to identify perpetrator or motive, but to reconstruct the sequence leading to the car at the lake bottom. In the new model, Evelyn leaving the store and not returning to her car became pivotal, opening possibilities she did not leave the lot voluntarily. The strange vehicle presence, especially Delmont's truck, could relate to her being approached or removed, or she left with an unidentified acquaintance. The northeast marked map, plus the Bear Lake find, indicated her final journey may have extended in a direction police ignored in 1959. The car not found in any search areas near Ogden reinforced it left the last sighting faster than police search start. In the preliminary model, the hard-to-access submersion site suggested intentional action, not random or typical accident. These points, combined with overlooked 1959 details, showed Evelyn's final journey likely did not match the initial hypothesis of direct Ogden to Millcreek travel. Instead, the original file plus 2004 discovery painted a more complex picture, where her disappearance may have tied to one or more individuals seen around the parking lot that day. Comparing the 1959 file with the 2004 forensic findings led the investigation team to realize the need to re-interrogate individuals who had appeared on the expanded suspect list, particularly David Delmont, who owned a dark-colored truck matching the witness description and had been seen near the Ogden commercial area on the morning Evelyn disappeared. In the context of modern investigative technology, allowing for more effective exploitation of statement, the investigators applied updated interrogation techniques from the early 2000s, such as detailing cross-references, establishing continuous timelines, analyzing body language, and using physical evidence to create appropriate psychological pressure. Delmont initially maintained a stance of non-involvement in the case, reiterating that in 1959 he had only coincidentally driven through the Ogden area to deliver materials. However, when the investigators presented images of the Chevy Bel Air salvaged from Bear Lake and information about the evidence found inside, along with recalling the 1959 witness statements, describing a truck similar to his moving slowly around the commercial area, Delmont's attitude began to change. Hesitation was evident when he was asked to describe in more detail the route he had taken on the day Evelyn went missing, something he could not recall accurately if he had truly only been traveling according to his work routine. When asked whether he had given anyone a ride that day, Delmont initially denied it, but when the investigator mentioned the cigarette ash sample found in the victim's car, something inconsistent with Evelyn's habits, and suggested that the person who left the ash might have been in the car before it sank, he began to waver. After more than 2 hours of intermittent questioning, Delmont changed his statement and admitted to having given a woman a ride that morning. He described the woman as having height and hairstyle matching Evelyn's description, though he claimed he did not know her identity at the time. This statement marked the first breakthrough in the investigation because, for the first time in 45 years, an individual admitted to direct contact with a woman matching the victim's description at a time close to when she went missing. When asked why he had given the woman a ride, Delmont stated that Manuel Rojas had contacted him the previous evening, asking him to drive to the Ogden area to pick up a person who needed to be taken to a meeting point outside of town. According to Delmont, Rojas had not specified the reason for the trip, only providing a small amount of money as payment and requesting that he ask no questions. In the context of Delmont having done various odd transport jobs for many people, that request at the time did not seem unusual to him. When the investigators asked him to describe the route he took to drop the woman off, Delmont stated that after picking her up near the Ogden commercial area, in the spot he was instructed she would be waiting, he drove out of downtown, heading northeast, along less traveled roads. This statement significantly matched the location where the Chevy Bel Air was found under Bear Lake, lying exactly in the direction of travel Delmont described. Delmont said, "The woman did not talk much during the trip, only asking him to stop at a dirt road section outside Ogden, where he said Rojas would appear to continue the arrangements. After letting her out, he drove away and did not return to the area." When the investigator asked if he had seen Evelyn's Chevy Bel Air in that area, Delmont said he did not remember clearly, but had seen a car parked near the dirt road, though he was not sure what it was. Although this statement was not sufficient to determine the specific situation, it provided important details matching the forensic data. The Chevy found sunk in a remote area may have been moved from its last known position in the direction Delmont described. This strengthened the possibility that the victim and her vehicle had been taken in two different directions during the same journey. When the forensic experts presented the DNA results on the hair found in the car to Delmont, information showing the hair belonged to Evelyn, his previous denials became unconvincing. From there, he admitted that the woman he had given a ride to was very likely Evelyn, though he insisted he did not know who she was at the time and was not involved in whatever happened after she left his truck. When the investigator asked him to describe exactly where he dropped the woman off and the small details of the route, Delmont provided many coordinates and terrain descriptions matching the roads leading to the area near Bear Lake, an overlap that could not be ignored given the high match rate between the route and the submerged car scene, too significant to be considered random. Delmont's statement also aligned with the cigarette ash detail in the car, something Evelyn did not use. Delmont confessed that he smoked while driving and might have left ash in her car if he had been in the car before it sank. Though this was not independent evidence, the consistency of this detail with the recovered physical evidence further reinforced the accuracy of his new statement. At the end of the interrogation session, the investigation team noted that Delmont's statement had opened a clear direction for analysis: his presence at the right time, the journey in the direction of Bear Lake, the description matching the vehicle discovery location, and his admission of transporting a woman resembling Evelyn at Rojas's request, all formed a chain of legally significant data. This was the first time an individual provided a statement matching both the old file and the new forensic findings, helping to form the initial foundation for reconstructing the final hours in Evelyn Mercer's journey. Delmont's admission of transporting a woman matching Evelyn Mercer's description at Manuel Rojas's request led the investigation team to expand the scope of interrogation to the two remaining individuals on the expanded suspect list to determine whether Delmont's statement reflected a solitary intervention or was part of an organized structure. When summoned, Rojas initially evaded questions related to 1959, claiming his memory was no longer clear enough to recall details. However, when the investigators cross-referenced Delmont's statement with the location where the Chevy Bel Air was found and data from the old file, Rojas began to show similar hesitation as Delmont had earlier. Modern interrogation techniques were applied, including establishing timelines, comparing statements among multiple witnesses, and analyzing the consistency of each response, gradually forcing Rojas to admit that he had acted as an intermediary in arranging for a woman to be taken to another location outside Ogden. He said that at the time, he had been hired to coordinate certain tasks introduced by Thomas Gonson, and that his main job was to relay information for others to carry out without directly participating in any violent acts. When the investigator asked about the origin of this request, Rojas stated that Gonson had given him a small amount of cash, along with a message that someone wanted to handle a problem related to Evelyn, but did not describe specifically what the problem was. These vague words had been viewed by the 1959 investigation team as unimportant details, but in the new context, they suggested the possibility of an intentional request related to the victim. The investigation team continued to summon Gonson to clarify his role in the event, particularly the information Rojas provided about receiving cash to relay the task. Initially, Gonson denied any involvement, but when asked about the small transactions he had done for certain individuals with better financial means than himself in the late 1950s, his response tone gradually changed. The investigator presented information about the cigarette ash in the car, the submerged car location, Delmont's statement, and the coordinating role Rojas had admitted to, creating significant psychological pressure on Gonson. When directly asked whether he had received money from anyone to resolve a problem related to Evelyn, he paused longer than usual before admitting it. According to Gonson, the person who gave him the money was not Rojas but an individual with direct social ties to the victim, Robert Blackstone, Evelyn's ex-husband. Gonson described that Blackstone had given him cash during a meeting in a parking lot behind a diner, while asking him to ensure that the thing that needed to be done was passed to the right person. When the investigator asked to clarify the nature of the thing that needed to be done, Gonson said that Blackstone mentioned needing to prevent Evelyn from continuing to cause trouble in his new life. Though no sentence directly described an intent to harm, the context of the words and the accompanying money helped the investigation team determine that the request might involve intervening in the victim's behavior. When cross-referencing Gonson's statement with the 1959 documents, the cold case team noted that the time Blackstone made the call asking for Evelyn's address matched the time Gonson provided for receiving the money. This created the first intersection between the new statements and the old data, showing that Blackstone's action at that time was not just familial, but might be related to a prearranged plan. Additionally, Delmont being directed by Rojas to drive a woman out of Ogden aligned with Gonson acting as the intermediary and Rojas receiving the request. The transmission chain, Blackstone, Gonson, Rojas, Delmont began to form more clearly in the new model. The investigation team conducted an analysis of the connections between the three men and Blackstone. Gonson served as the direct contact with Blackstone. Rojas coordinated and relayed messages. Delmont handled the transport, and no statement denied this alignment when cross-referenced with the forensic evidence from the car. The discovery of Evelyn's hair in the car confirmed her presence in her own vehicle before it sank. The discovery of cigarette ash, a habit of Delmont's, also matched the statement that he had been in the car. Though there was no direct evidence that Rojas or Gonson were in the car, their statements aligned with their roles in assigning tasks in the chain of events. Finally, the investigation team needed to determine the mastermind's motive and assess whether Gonson's statement about receiving money from Blackstone fit the context of the personal relationship between Evelyn and her ex-husband. The 1959 file had recorded ongoing conflicts between the two, related to family disputes and separation of lives after divorce. If this was true, Blackstone wanting to prevent Evelyn from causing trouble in his new life further demonstrated a tight connection to the statement that he wanted someone to handle the problem. When the event model was synthesized, the investigation team determined that the mastermind's motive might be directly related to Blackstone's personal conflicts and interests, while Rojas, Gonson, and Delmont played roles in executing different parts of the chain of events. This was the first time in 45 years that a conspiracy model involving multiple individuals was clearly established, based on independent but compatible statements and consistent with the physical evidence from the car submerged under Bear Lake. Having collected full new statements from Delmont, Rojas, and Gonson along with the forensic analysis results of the Chevy Bel Air salvaged from Bear Lake, the investigation team began reconstructing the entire timeline of events related to Evelyn Mercer's disappearance in 1959. The goal of this step was to combine all data sources, forensic from the submerged car scene, newly collected statements, original 1959 documents, and route analysis, to create a seamless chronological sequence from when Evelyn left home to the moment the car was disposed of in the lake. First, the team confirmed the starting point. Evelyn left her home in Millcreek in the morning and was seen in the Ogden commercial area at the time witnesses described, shopping and heading toward the parking lot. This was the last sighting point, recorded by consistent statements, and considered the final moment Evelyn controlled her actions without external intervention. After this point, Delmont's statement became the central source of information. He admitted being directed by Rojas to the Ogden area to pick up a woman matching Evelyn's description. When connecting this statement to the 1959 data, the investigation team concluded that Evelyn being approached right at the parking lot was the most grounded possibility, as no witness saw her driving the Chevy out of the area herself. This information aligned with patterns in many similar disappearances from that era, where victims were approached in the observational gap between the store and the vehicle. With the new data, the cold case team reconstructed the middle part of the timeline. Delmont arrived at the parking lot, as instructed by Rojas, approached Evelyn under circumstances not yet clear, possibly in a voluntary scenario if she was convinced to go to a meeting point, or involuntarily if forced into the truck. But in either scenario, Delmont's admission of driving her northeast showed that Evelyn left Ogden in his vehicle rather than her own Chevy. Analysis of the route Delmont described when taking Evelyn to the next meeting point showed the journey matched the directions to the submerged car location. The points he described, remote dirt roads, distance from Ogden northeast, transition from paved to trail roads, matched the terrain structure around Bear Lake and the secondary roads leading to the lake in 1959. This was the basis for the investigation team to conclude that Evelyn's journey in her final hours led her to an area far from Ogden in a completely different direction from the route back to Millcreek. When forensics determined the Chevy Bel Air sank in Bear Lake around the approximate time of her disappearance, the team had to determine the disposal mechanism for the car. Analysis of the car's position, sinking angle, sediment layer, and water depth indicated that the vehicle did not fall into the lake as a spontaneous accident. Experts assessed that the car left no collision marks on nearby cliffs, nor tire skid marks on the surface leading to the lake. This suggested the vehicle was most likely brought to the water's edge without a driver and pushed straight down. This mechanism aligned with intentional disposal. The car was taken to deep water and released to conceal its connection to the disappearance. This completely eliminated the accident hypothesis and reinforced the argument that the car had been driven by one or more individuals other than Evelyn. When reconstructing the journey, the final time model became clear. Evelyn left the store, approached the parking lot, was driven away by Delmont at Rojas's request, to a meeting point in a remote area, and there, Gonson or another individual took over. The Chevy was moved out of Ogden afterward along a separate route, possibly by one of the three men or someone associated with them. The car being found in Bear Lake, not on Evelyn's logical route, proved that the vehicle was no longer under her control from the moment she left the parking lot. The preliminary event model also determined criminal responsibility roles for each subject based on statements and route logic. Delmont responsible for taking the victim out of the Ogden area, Rojas for coordinating and directing, while Gonson for connecting with Robert Blackstone and receiving cash from him to implement the task. Blackstone, identified as the origin of the chain of actions through providing finances and purpose, was viewed as the ringleader in the responsibility model. When the data pieces were assembled, the complete timeline from Evelyn leaving home to the car sinking formed a continuous chain of events with no logical gaps like in the 1959 file. This timeline reconstruction became the foundation for the investigation team to establish the legal responsibility structure for the entire group involved in Evelyn Mercer's disappearance. When the timeline of events was fully reconstructed, and the model of criminal responsibility for each individual in the 1959 chain of actions was clearly established, the Weber County investigation team, in coordination with the prosecutor's office, began preparing the dossier to request an official arrest warrant for Robert Blackstone. This dossier included all forensic data from the Chevy Bel Air salvaged from Bear Lake, DNA analysis results confirming Evelyn's presence in the vehicle prior to its submersion, new testimony from Delmont, in which he admitted to transporting a woman matching the victim's description at Rojas's request, along with subsequent testimonies from Rojas and Gonson, describing the receipt of instructions, cash payments, and their intermediary roles between Blackstone and those carrying out the transportation portion. In addition, the dossier compiled elements overlooked in 1959, such as Blackstone's call inquiring about the address, the history of conflict between the two, and details demonstrating personal motive. The entire set of documents was submitted to the federal judge's office to obtain permission to issue the arrest warrant, with the prosecution emphasizing that the discovery of the submerged vehicle was the first physical evidence capable of proving interference leading to the victim's fate, breaking the deadlock that had persisted for nearly half a century. After the arrest warrant was signed with charges related to arranging and coordinating actions resulting in serious disappearance, law enforcement, in coordination with the federal investigation team, prepared to execute the arrest plan at Blackstone's residence. The location was identified as a quiet residential area where he had lived stably for many years, with no signs that he suspected the case had been reopened. To avoid drawing attention and minimize risks, the forces employed a surprise approach tactic at a time when Blackstone was at home and not moving. The investigators serving the arrest warrant approached the area from multiple directions to ensure he had no opportunity to leave or contact any individual who might tamper with evidence. Upon reaching the front door, they announced the arrest warrant in accordance with procedure, presenting their identities, purpose, and the legal rights of the arrestee as required. Blackstone was instructed to step out of the house and cooperate during the handcuffing process to ensure safety for both him and the authorities. He appeared surprised, but did not resist, instead asking questions about the reason for the arrest. Per procedure, the investigator provided no details beyond announcing the official charges recorded in the warrant. Blackstone was then placed in a patrol vehicle and transported to the Weber County Detention Facility to await his initial appearance before a judge. During this process, the investigators sealed and secured the residence for additional searches in case documents or evidence related to the old case existed. The arrest was carried out in an orderly manner without incident and was fully documented in the administrative report. This moment marked a pivotal turning point in the entire Evelyn Mercer case. For the first time in 45 years, the investigating agency had sufficient evidence, testimonies, and legal analysis to proceed with arresting the individual identified as the mastermind in the chain of events leading to the victim's disappearance. Blackstone's detention was seen as a necessary step to ensure the safety of the legal process while allowing the investigating agency to continue gathering additional data without fear of interference or concealment from him. This was also the official action affirming that the case was not only reactivated but had advanced to the prosecution phase, something unprecedented in the entire investigation history of Evelyn Mercer's disappearance. The trial of Robert Blackstone in 2004 opened in a particularly grave atmosphere as the prosecutor presented that this was a disappearance case spanning nearly half a century, but finally had sufficient physical evidence, testimonies, and forensic data to proceed with prosecution. In the opening, the prosecution introduced the core evidence, starting with the Chevy Bel Air, salvaged from Bear Lake, the key exhibit re-establishing the entire nature of the case. In court, forensic experts described the degree of corrosion, layers of biofouling and sediment structure adhering to the vehicle to demonstrate that it had been submerged since the late 1950s, perfectly matching the time of Evelyn Mercer's disappearance. They also presented hair samples found in the vehicle compartment and DNA identification results, in which the mitochondrial DNA sequence from the hair matched the reference sample from the Mercer family, confirming the victim's presence in the vehicle before it sank. Other exhibits, fabric fragments, cigarette butts, mud traces, although not independently conclusive, were presented to prove the likelihood of another person's presence in the vehicle besides Evelyn, reinforcing the roles of those involved in the event timeline. In addition to forensic evidence, the prosecution presented breakthrough testimonies from 3 individuals: David Delmont, who admitted to transporting a woman matching Evelyn's description at Rojas's request; Manuel Rojas, who admitted to coordinating and relaying the transportation task; and Thomas Gonson, who confessed to receiving cash from Robert Blackstone to handle the issue related to Evelyn. The testimonies of all 3 were presented in court, along with notes, diagrams, and cross-reference records to prove the tight linkage between them and the defendant Blackstone in a deliberate chain of actions. The prosecutors focused on clarifying that the testimonies of the 3, though independent, converged on the same pattern. Blackstone provided the money and motive, Gonson was the intermediary receiving the money, Rojas coordinated, and Delmont directly transported the victim out of the Ogden area. Furthermore, the map found in Evelyn's wallet, previously dismissed in 1959, was introduced as supporting evidence. The prosecution presented that the markings on the map matched the direction of travel described by Delmont when transporting the victim out of Ogden, aligning with traffic routes of that era, leading to an area not far from Bear Lake. Although the map did not pinpoint the final location, it served to supplement the reconstructed timeline, showing that Evelyn's journey was likely directed in a completely different direction from the route home. As all the exhibits and testimonies were presented, the prosecution projected an event timeline reconstruction in court, a visual model illustrating the process from when Evelyn left Millcreek, appeared in the Ogden commercial area, was approached in the parking lot, transported by Delmont along a northeast route, and ended with the Chevy being pushed into Bear Lake. The timeline reconstruction demonstrated consistency between forensic evidence, testimonies, and geographic data, helping the jury visualize the entire progression of the disappearance clearly and seamlessly. Blackstone's defense attorney attempted to counter by focusing on the ambiguity of some testimonies, particularly emphasizing the years that had passed, which could distort witnesses' memories. They argued that the testimonies of Gonson, Rojas, and Delmont all emerged after nearly half a century, and thus could not guarantee accuracy. However, when the prosecution cross-referenced their testimonies with physical evidence, especially the submerged vehicle, its discovery location, DNA results, and unchanging factors over time, the defense's arguments gradually lost weight. The finding of Evelyn's hair in the vehicle, along with cigarette butts, matching Delmont's smoking habit, created an undeniable chain, confirming that the victim was in the vehicle with at least one other individual before it was disposed of. Additionally, the cash transfers from Blackstone to Gonson, described by both with matching details, was a point the defense could not refute with memory distortion claims. They could not produce any physical evidence to negate the legal significance of the testimonies, nor explain why the independent testimonies of 3 people aligned with each other and fit the submerged vehicle scene. Faced with the tightly linked chain of evidence, forensic testimonies old documents, geographic analysis, and timeline reconstruction, the defense could only offer general rebuttals without substantive arguments to dismantle the case's logical structure. As the evidence presentation concluded, the jury had been exposed to all critical information, creating a solid foundation to consider Robert Blackstone's legal responsibility for Evelyn Mercer's disappearance. After both sides completed their presentations and the jury deliberated for many hours, based on all the forensic evidence, testimonies, and chains of reasoning presented in the trial, the final verdict was announced in federal court in 2004. Based on the established timeline model, Robert Blackstone's central role in providing money, setting the motive, and initiating the chain of actions, leading to Evelyn Mercer being removed from Ogden, disappearing, and her Chevy Bel Air being disposed of at Bear Lake. The jury declared the defendant guilty of kidnapping resulting in death, a federal charge encompassing kidnapping leading to death, regardless of whether the victim's body was found. The prosecution presented that the evidence showed the victim was taken against her will or without the ability to leave freely, and that Blackstone's actions, along with his accomplices, directly led to Evelyn never returning. The sentence pronounced by the judge was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, based on the severity of the conduct, the nearly half-century-long evidence concealment, and the intentional cover-up to obstruct the investigation. The sentencing reflected the legal assessment that Blackstone was the mastermind, with a clear personal motive, based on Gonson's testimony and old documents recording the history of conflict between him and the victim. After Blackstone was convicted, the court proceeded to consider the criminal responsibility of the three accomplices in the same event model. David Delmont, who admitted to transporting Evelyn out of Ogden under Rojas's direction, received a lighter sentence due to his cooperation with the investigating agency after the case was reopened. Although his role was direct, particularly in removing the victim from the last place she was seen, Delmont's sentence was adjusted under the accessory to kidnapping resulting in death framework due to his cooperation and testimony being the key to breaking the 45-year deadlock. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Manuel Rojas, who coordinated and relayed instructions from Gonson to Delmont, received a 30-year sentence for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, with aggravating factors for linking multiple individuals in the chain of actions. Rojas's admission of his role, provision of information confirming Delmont's testimony, and identification of the decisive meeting location on the day of Evelyn's disappearance earned him a sentence below the maximum, but still reflecting his legal responsibility. Thomas Gonson, who served as the direct financial intermediary receiving money from Robert Blackstone, was seen as the key link connecting the mastermind to the executors. Gonson's testimony was a critical verification factor for Blackstone's motive and the task delegation mechanism. However, since receiving the money and participating in the arrangement was viewed as directly contributing to the conduct leading to death, he received the highest sentence among the accomplices, 40 years in federal prison for conspiracy to commit kidnapping, resulting in death. In all three cases, the sentences were determined based on the degree of involvement, intent, and level of cooperation with the investigating agency during the case reopening. After sentencing each defendant, the judge read the official conclusion on the case, emphasizing that this was an unusually prolonged investigation affected by the technological limitations of the 1950s and the lack of physical evidence over many decades. However, the 2004 discovery of the Chevy Bel Air provided a strong legal and scientific foundation to reopen the case and bring it to a final conclusion. The official file on Evelyn Mercer's disappearance was closed with the conclusion that she had been lured or forced to leave the Ogden commercial area, transported to a remote area in the northeast by Delmont under Rojas's direction. In a chain of actions arranged by Gonson at the financial and personal motive request of Robert Blackstone, the disposal of the vehicle at Bear Lake was determined to be intentional concealment, carried out in the spirit of complicity, and aimed at preventing investigation. In the final legal conclusion, the court emphasized that although Evelyn's body was not found, the physical evidence, testimonies, and forensic analysis were strong enough to establish the crime under federal legal standards. With all involved parties convicted and all key legal questions resolved, the case was concluded in the Weber County files with complete investigative findings, closing one of the longest cold cases in state history. After the sentences for Robert Blackstone and his accomplices were pronounced, the Evelyn Mercer case quickly became a model example reviewed by Utah's legislative bodies and law enforcement organizations as an illustration of the limitations in 1950s missing persons investigation procedures, while also serving as a catalyst for a series of important reforms in the years following 2004. The State Investigation Agency conducted a comprehensive analysis of the factors that caused the case to stall for nearly half a century without progress, starting with the reporting intake process of that era. In 1959, the system for receiving reports relied heavily on the subjective judgment of the duty officer and loose case classification standards, causing the Mercer family's initial information to not be handled with the necessary urgency. After the case, Utah issued statewide unified guidelines requiring every missing persons report, especially cases of adults suddenly disappearing without a history of leaving residence, to be recorded immediately and shifted to active investigation status within the first few hours, rather than waiting for them to return as many old procedures had done. This was one of the largest reforms related to missing persons report intake, aimed at ensuring that critical traces in the first 24 hours were not missed as in Evelyn's case. Next, Utah also undertook a comprehensive overhaul of the case file storage system after recognizing that 1959's fragmented, unstandardized storage had prevented subsequent decade investigation teams from fully utilizing the data. The map file with suspicious markings, Blackstone's call notes, or related vehicle descriptions being scattered across undigitized documents had limited retrieval capabilities. After the case, Utah mandated that all state law enforcement agencies use a unified file storage system, including digitized data, classification tagging, and integration with federal archives for long-term access. This reform ensured that a missing persons case from 1960 or 1980 could be re-examined with complete information, avoiding the prolonged fragmentation seen in the Mercer file. Along with that, one of the most evident impacts of the case was the strong investment in Utah's forensic capabilities. The Evelyn Mercer case clearly showed that for many decades, the lack of physical evidence, or the ability to examine it, had kept the file from progressing. In 1959, there was no DNA technology, no capacity to analyze material structures or sediments, and no proper sample preservation standards. But in 2004, the emergence of the submerged vehicle, along with modern analyses, demonstrated that forensics could become the foundation for solving seemingly unsolvable cold cases. After the trial, Utah invested in modern forensic laboratories, specialist training programs in biological analysis, and stricter scene collection preservation procedures, ensuring that any evidence, no matter how small, could become a crucial piece in the future. The case also led the state to strengthen federal coordination systems, making cold case reopenings more efficient through data sharing, technical support, and nationwide forensic linkages. Finally, the Evelyn Mercer case became a historical milestone in Utah's cold case investigation records for many reasons. It was one of the longest missing persons cases in state history, fully resolved through the combination of modern forensics, new testimonies, and re-examination of overlooked details in old files. The case also proved that a cold case spanning many decades could still be solved when physical evidence was discovered, while emphasizing the importance of file preservation and investment in investigative technology. In post-2004 state summary reports, the Evelyn Mercer case was often cited as proof of investigative persistence and a driver for Utah to establish a modern standard cold case unit. From then on, the case was viewed as a key part of the process to upgrade Utah's entire missing persons investigation system, closing the file with a complete legal conclusion and leaving a lasting legacy in the state's law enforcement work. The story of the Evelyn Mercer case, a woman who disappeared in 1959 and whose first clue was only found after 45 years when the Chevy Bel Air surfaced from Bear Lake, carries many valuable lessons for American life today, especially in a context where people increasingly rely on technology, but also face numerous risks to personal safety and information gaps. First, Evelyn's disappearance in the short distance from the Ogden commercial area to the parking lot reminds us that dangerous situations often occur in observational gaps, moments that seem too ordinary to guard against. From the detail of Delmont admitting he was asked by Rojas to pick up Evelyn, we see that a seemingly small act, approaching the victim in a familiar space, can lead to a chain of serious consequences. The lesson here is that personal vigilance in modern life remains as important as in 1959. Pay attention to surroundings, avoid private interactions with strangers, and always share basic schedules with family. Additionally, the 1959 investigating agency's lack of sufficient forensic tools and strict missing persons reporting procedures, causing the file to deadlock for decades, shows that systems, whether from 1959 or 2024, always need continuous investment. The fact that Evelyn's car sank under Bear Lake for so long without detection reminds us that technology, databases, and administrative procedures can determine whether a person is found early or not. This reinforces the belief that supporting budgets for forensics, security databases, and dedicated cold case teams is a practical action the American community should maintain. Finally, the case highlights the importance of speaking up when noticing something unusual. 3 decades after the disappearance, even a small testimony, like from a resident who saw a dark-colored truck in Ogden, still became a crucial piece when technology advanced. This encourages every American today to proactively report suspicious behavior, because you never know if a small detail you observe could save a life in the future. If you want to continue following cases solved after decades like Evelyn Mercer's, please subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next video, where we continue to uncover the truth hidden behind files seemingly buried by time.